They used to laugh at us, not out of cruelty, out of genuine confusion. We were soft-skinned, slow-healing, sleep-dependent little creatures who had somehow wandered off our rock and demanded a seat at the table. The Vreth found us amusing. The Sorval found us pitiable. And the Kethuran, the apex of apexes, the thing that made every other apex predator step aside, barely registered our existence at all. Past tense. All of that is past tense now. My name is Kale Maris. I am a xenobiologist, which is a fancy word for someone whose job is to study life on other worlds. I have spent 11 years doing this work aboard the Galactic Accord vessel Continuum, attending summits, cataloging creatures, and filing reports that nobody reads. I am not a soldier. I am not a diplomat. I am the person in the corner with the data tablet, quietly noticing things that everyone else is too important to bother with. That, it turns out, is exactly the kind of person the galaxy should have been paying attention to. It started with a snack platter. I was at a diplomatic summit on Nexar 7, a station so large it had its own weather patterns inside the residential dome. I was the only human in a room of 43 delegates from 22 species. The Vreth, 8-limbed, quick, and breathtakingly fast when they chose to move, were the guests of honor that cycle. They had recently resolved a territorial disagreement with the Sorval, and everyone was being politely celebratory. There were refreshments, long tables of them. On one of those tables, arranged in careful rows on a bed of pressed leaves, was a creature I recognized. Small, 6-legged, with a shell the color of old copper. I had cataloged that species 3 months earlier. My report had flagged it as near threatened, its population declining faster than natural cycles could explain. I picked one up and asked the nearest Sorval delegate about it. She had 4 mouths, all of them capable of expressing emotions independently, which made Sorval the easiest species in the Accord to read once you learned the vocabulary. She smiled with 2 mouths, and used the other 2 for a small, gentle laugh. Population models, she explained, must have been wrong. These things happen with new survey data. I set the creature back down. I filed a report that evening. It joined 47 other reports I had filed that cycle. None of them were marked urgent. 3 months after the summit, the Vreth delegation failed to appear for a scheduled session. No message, no cancellation. The Accord administrators assumed a territorial dispute had flared up again. These things happened with the Vreth, who were proud and easily offended. Nobody sent a formal inquiry for 4 days. I pulled their communications and migration data on day 1. The Vreth home sector had gone quiet, not disrupted, not damaged, not the kind of quiet that follows a confrontation, just quiet, the way a room goes quiet when everyone in it has simply left. The last recorded transmission from their home system was a routine trade invoice, dated 19 days before the missed session. It was for a shipment of industrial coolant, very ordinary, very final. I went back to my 47 reports. I spread them across my workspace and looked at them the way you look at a puzzle when you suspect the pieces belong to a different picture than the one on the box. In 14 of those reports, species with centuries of stable population data had simply stopped appearing in their last recorded habitats. No signs of disease, no predation evidence, no environmental collapse, just absence, clean and total and quiet. I mapped the absences in space. The result made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, which is something that happens to humans when our bodies detect something our minds have not yet caught up to. The absences formed a slow, spreading perimeter, irregular at the edges, but directional at the center. It was moving, inward, toward the densely populated sectors, toward the heart of the Accord, toward us. I brought this to Commander Vesselmind Theron, my Sorval superior. She was careful, and experienced, and genuinely kind, which made what she said next easier to hear, but no easier to accept. She explained that humans had a well-documented tendency toward pattern recognition, a survival instinct that had served us well on our homeworld, but sometimes caused us to find shapes in random data that were not truly there. She was not dismissing me. She was protecting me from an embarrassing conclusion. She was wrong, but I thanked her and went back to my desk. Then the Kethuran went silent. If you do not know what the Kethuran are, you have not spent much time in the outer reaches of Accord space, where their reputation arrives long before any ship does. They were the oldest spacefaring species in the known galaxy, not the most technologically advanced, but the most deeply feared. Not because of weapons or fleets, but because of what they were: telepathic, ancient, operating on a level of awareness that most species could not even perceive, let alone match. Every other apex predator in the galaxy, species that could crack a hull with their bodies, species that hunted in packs across planetary surfaces, species that had been terrifying things for millions of years, gave the Kethuran a wide, respectful distance. Nobody had expected to hear from them anyway. They communicated on their own schedule, which was rarely, and with great selectiveness. So it took 6 days for anyone to officially note that their regular, sparse transmissions had stopped entirely. I noticed on day 2. I sat with what I was starting to understand, and I did not like it. Not because it was frightening, though it was. I did not like it because it reminded me of something from history, from Earth's history, from a chapter that biologists and anthropologists had argued about for generations. The Pleistocene. Roughly 10,000 years ago, ancient by human reckoning, barely a moment by galactic standards, humans began spreading out of Africa and across the Earth. Continent by continent, island by island, they moved. And as they moved, something happened. The large animals disappeared. Mastodons, cave lions, woolly rhinoceroses, giant ground sloths the size of small houses, species that had survived ice ages and asteroid winters, and everything the planet had thrown at them for hundreds of thousands of years. Gone. Not one by one in fair, recorded confrontations. Just gone. Following the footprints of the new arrivals, continent after continent, with what the scientists who studied it later called suspicious regularity. The debate had always been whether humans had hunted them deliberately, or whether the megafauna simply did not know how to respond to something they had never encountered before. Something that set off every ancient alarm in their nervous systems. Something that their millions of years of evolutionary experience had given them no framework for understanding. I pulled every record I could find of human movement through the galactic arm since first contact. Trade routes, survey missions, settlement bids, tourist registrations. I mapped all of it. Then I laid that map over my map of the disappearing species. The overlap was not perfect. It never is with ecological patterns. But it was clear enough that my hands were not entirely steady when I set the tablet down. The perimeter of silence was not moving toward the core. It was moving away from human space, outward, in every direction, as though the galaxy itself was exhaling, as though something was evacuating. I requested an emergency session with the full Accord Council. I was granted a preliminary concern review, which is the kind of meeting you get when the people scheduling meetings are not yet convinced you deserve an emergency session. I presented the data anyway, all of it. Every absent species, every quiet sector, every overlapping map. I was careful. I was scientific. I used hedged language and probabilistic framing, and everything they had taught us to do when presenting conclusions that might seem overreaching. One delegate suggested solar interference for the Keth-Uran blackout. Another raised the possibility of a Vreth migration cycle. A third, very carefully, asked whether I was familiar with the documented human tendency toward existential projection. I let the room finish. Then I asked one question. If I showed you this exact pattern, I said, and the species at the center of the expanding silence was Sorval, or Keth-Uran, what would you call it? The room was quiet for a moment. A threat vector, Thuran said. Her voice was low. Honest. We would call it a threat vector. Then call it that, I said. The session was upgraded to emergency status within the hour, but I did not feel relief. I was watching the faces around the table, the mouths and eye clusters and sensory fronds of 22 species, and what I saw there was not comfort. It was recategorization. I could see it happening in real time. The small human in the corner, who had been here 11 years, who filed reports nobody read, was being looked at differently now. Not as a threat, as a signal. The first note of something larger that had not yet arrived. A Keth-Uran vessel reached Nexar 7 4 days later. It was the first time any Keth-Uran ship had approached a populated station in recorded Accord history. They requested a meeting through a relay drone. They never communicated directly, and they requested it specifically with the human delegation. Only the human delegation. I walked into the meeting chamber alone. I had been a xenobiologist for 11 years, and I thought I was prepared for most things. I was not prepared for what the Keth-Uran felt like in person. There was no body, just a field of organized presence, like pressure that had learned to have opinions. When it spoke, I felt the words more than heard them. The message was surprisingly simple. They were leaving the galactic arm. They had been leaving, slowly and quietly, since humans had arrived. Not in response to anything we had done, in response to what we were. The Kathuran had been the unchallenged apex of awareness in the galaxy for longer than most civilizations had existed. They had encountered every significant form of intelligence in the known reaches. They had a framework for all of it: prey, competitor, predator, symbiont. Everything fit somewhere. Humans did not fit anywhere. I asked them what, specifically, they could not categorize. The field of presence was quiet for a long time, long enough that I wondered whether the meeting was over and I had missed the signal. Then the answer came, pressed into the air around me like something physical. Persistence, it said. Pathological, joyful, weaponized persistence. You are the first thing we have encountered that suffering does not stop. They explained what I had suspected. The disappearances were not a mystery, they were ecology. The galactic food chain, if you could call it that, was reorganizing itself around a new variable. The Vreth were not gone. They had relocated, deep and quiet, the way a small animal relocates when a new animal moves into the territory. Not because the new animal had threatened them, because the new animal's presence triggered something old and wordless in their nervous systems. The same signal that had moved megafauna in the Pleistocene, the recognition that something had arrived which did not know how to lose. That had never learned, at any point in its history, to simply stop. Every species with sufficiently developed threat sensing had felt it and moved. Not out of hostility, out of something older. The biological equivalent of wisdom. I walked back into the council chamber and sat down at my usual seat in the corner. Theron looked at my face. She was very good at reading humans by then. She looked at me the way you look at something when you realize you have been wrong about what category it belongs in. The other delegates were watching me too. I thought about what I was. A xenobiologist. A person who studied other species for a living. A person who spent 11 years in a corner filing reports and noticing things. I thought about the Pleistocene. I thought about the snack platter. I thought about 47 unread reports and one near-threatened species on a bed of pressed leaves. I thought about the fact that every apex predator in the galaxy had looked at humanity and felt, in whatever deep and ancient part of themselves handled such assessments, that they did not want to find out what happened next. I went back to my desk. I had one more report to file. It was my best one. I titled it simply, Notes on Human Threat Profile, for the record. I wrote it carefully, the way I wrote everything, because I believed that things should be done correctly, even when nobody was watching. I included all the data. I included the maps. I included a section on why this should not be a cause for alarm, which was the hardest section to write, because I was not entirely sure I believed it. I ended it with a single line. Not a conclusion, exactly. More of an honest observation from someone who had spent his entire career trying to understand life in its many forms. We are not dangerous because we are strong. We are dangerous because we do not understand why we are supposed to stop. I submitted the report at 0312 station time. Then I picked up my coffee, which had gone completely cold while I was writing, and I walked to the observation bay and looked out at the stars. They held their positions the way they always did, patient and old and completely unbothered. Out in the dark between them, I knew, the greatest predators the galaxy had ever produced were pressing themselves into the deepest and furthest corners of the deep, making room. Not for an empire, not for a fleet, not for a war that had never happened and, I suspected, never would. For one sleep-deprived xenobiologist with cold coffee and the embarrassing, stubborn, deeply human conviction that if he just kept looking, he would eventually find out what was wrong. I suppose they were not wrong to be cautious. I had never been able to explain to anyone, human or otherwise, why I find it so difficult to simply let things go. I finished the coffee anyway. Cold or not, it was still coffee. I went back to my desk. I had work to do.